Well, the first thing that I do anywhere I go and talk about the book of Revelation is I tell people up front, here are my assumptions. This is what I come in with. Because here's the thing, everyone has assumptions. You all came with assumptions, but most of us don't state them or recognize them or own them, right? It's only when someone kind of pushes on those assumptions that we kind of realize, oh my goodness, I'm biased, or I'm prejudiced, or some of us, unfortunately, will have the realization, I'm a racist, right? Somebody pushed the wrong button, and I had assumptions or prejudices or presuppositions. So when it comes to Revelation, there are three things that I want to just say up front. Here's what I think as we come in, and if you disagree with that, we'll probably have a lot to talk about this morning and this afternoon, but here's what I come with, all right? The first one on your outline is that this document made sense to its original audiences. I mean, that sounds like, seriously? Did we pay all that money to hear him say that? And the reality is that most people, in an unstated way, aren't sure that the apocalypse made sense to first century Christians. In fact, I've heard people say things like, God secretly hid things in the Bible that only we could know in our day. Have you ever heard someone say that about the book of Revelation? Yeah. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's the way God communicates. I don't know if anyone here has ever had the experience where God gave you something, or you came to some realization, or you had some information, and you immediately knew, I'm never going to know what that is, but God's just giving it to me to write down so someone 1,800 years later could know what that was all about. But many people read the book that way, and I insist that it actually made sense. So to have people interpret this text as though you had to be a Christian in the late 20th century in North America, or the early 21st century in the Western world, and you couldn't really know what the text was about unless you were that kind of person, that just doesn't seem to me to be the way God chose to communicate. Because it's clear in the way the author writes this text that he assumed that his audience knew what he was talking about. Now, listen. They may not have liked what he had to say, but they understood what he had to say. So the Christians in these churches in Asia Minor, this material made sense to them. And that's the first assumption that I come with. So I don't believe there's anything in the text that was hidden or secret or couldn't have been accessed by the first people that heard this text read. The second thing that I assume is that Revelation is a Christian text. I believe this document promotes the gracious salvation of God's peaceable kingdom. And those four words you'll want to fill in. That to me is crucial. I believe this document promotes the gracious salvation of God's peaceable kingdom. Whatever else we might be tempted to do with Revelation, we must ask the question, is its message compatible with Jesus' announcement of the good news? In other words, does this document truly articulate the way of the Messiah? Now, even that's a dangerous question to ask, because all of us have opinions about what the way of the Messiah might be. But here's how I'm asking the question. The Messiah, Jesus, as we encounter him in the Gospels of the New Testament, is that Jesus recognizable in John's Apocalypse? Does the book of Revelation, is it consistent in its proclamation of the good news, right? Jesus wandered around Galilee and Judea saying, good news! And my question for you is, do most Christians or others reading this text go, oh yeah, good news? And the answer is, I have a suspicion that that's not often the reaction. And so our task in part, and this is what session 2 is all about later on this morning, is asking that question and coming to terms with, is the Jesus of the Gospels recognizable in the book of Revelation? The third thing, and this will be what this first session is about, is I assume that before we can answer the what does it say or what does it mean questions, and those are 2 blanks on your outline, before I can ask the question, what does it say, or what does it mean, I must be able to answer the question, what is it? What is the book of Revelation? If I don't know what it is, then I can't very well answer the question of what does it say, what does it mean, what are the questions of interpretation, all of that. So let me give you a very brief example of what I mean as an entree then into our discussion of what an apocalypse actually is. How many of you in high school or college or wherever you've studied have ever had to write a piece of poetry? Okay, hands going up all over the place. How many of you have ever had to write a narrative of a real life event that happened in your life? Okay, many hands go up, right? And then we could even break that out further and say some of us have had to do, different kinds of writing exercises that whether, someone asked you to compose a haiku or whatever the case might be. But most of us will recognize those literary genres, right? Prose, poetry. How many of you ever had to write in high school an apocalypse? Okay, all right. So here's a fascinating thing about the way we process information, right? When you buy your son or daughter, or they earn the money to buy an iPod, for example, and the instructions fall out of the box, you automatically do not read that as poetry. Why is that? Your brain just shifted gears and said, I'm reading an instruction manual. And you made that shift without having to think about it. But if the next day was Valentine's Day and your husband or wife or boyfriend or child wrote you a card that started out, roses are red, violets are blue, your brain has automatically shifted gears and said, I'm reading poetry. So when it talks about giving me the moon, right? My husband doesn't actually plan to crawl into a NASA-launched rocket ship and get me a piece of the moon as an expression of his love and care. It was an expression. But your mind made that shift between the iPod instructions and the Valentine's card. And here's the rub for us as readers of John's Apocalypse. We don't know how to shift gears and read an apocalypse. That's why we have to ask the question, what is it? How does it work? So the purpose of the next 40 or 45 minutes is just to treat it like this object that we can turn over and look at and ask some of these questions, all right?